Just withdrew every penny from our account. Kevin showed me what real love looks like. Thanks for being such a generous ex-husband. My name's Garrett. I'm 39, been a master carpenter in Asheville for 12 years. That text arrived while I was restoring my dead father's workshop alone at midnight. My wife thought she'd just stolen our life savings and disappeared with her lover. What she didn't know was that I'd been 3 steps ahead of her for months, and she'd just walked into the perfect trap. I read it 3 times before it sank in. Then I checked our joint account on my phone. 0 balance. $12,400 gone, just like that. My wife Celeste was supposed to be at her book club meeting, discussing some novel about women finding themselves. Instead, she'd apparently found herself a new life and helped herself to our savings while I was honoring my father's memory. The workshop had been Dad's sanctuary. Every weekend of my childhood, I'd spend hours here watching him transform raw lumber into beautiful furniture. Hand-carved dining tables, custom cabinets, rocking chairs that would last generations. When he passed 3 months ago from a sudden heart attack, he left me everything. The workshop, all his tools, and a modest inheritance that Celeste had been eyeing ever since the will was read. "You're going to turn that dusty old shed into a business?" she'd said when I told her my plans. "Garrett, we could use that money for a down payment on a bigger house, somewhere more sophisticated." But this wasn't about money. This was about legacy. Dad had always dreamed of expanding the workshop, maybe teaching woodworking classes to young people. "Good craftsmanship is dying," he used to say. "Somebody needs to keep the old ways alive." I'd been working nights and weekends for 2 months, installing new electrical systems, updating the ventilation, organizing decades of accumulated tools and lumber. It was therapeutic, working with my hands the way Dad taught me. Each evening after my regular carpentry jobs, I'd come here and feel closer to him. Now, staring at that text message in the dim workshop light, I realized Celeste had been planning this. The timing wasn't coincidental. She knew exactly where I'd be and exactly when I'd be most vulnerable. The thing about being a master carpenter is you learn to read the grain of wood before you make your first cut. You study the patterns, look for weaknesses, plan your approach carefully. One wrong move and you can ruin a piece that took years to grow. People aren't that different from lumber. After 12 years building custom homes for wealthy clients in Asheville, I'd learned to spot the warning signs. When someone suddenly becomes interested in your tool collection after years of calling it man cave junk, that's a red flag. When they start asking about property values and inheritance details right after a funeral, that's another one. I'd grown up poor in the mountains outside Asheville. Dad ran a one-man carpentry operation, taking whatever jobs he could find. Kitchen remodels, deck repairs, furniture restoration. He taught me that honest work with your hands was the most honorable way to make a living. "Wood doesn't lie to you, son," he'd say. "It shows you exactly what it is. Wish I could say the same about people." At 27, I'd gotten my contractor's license and started my own business. Specialized in high-end custom work, built-in libraries, handcrafted kitchen cabinets, restoration of historic homes. The wealthy folks moving to Asheville from cities like Atlanta and Charlotte paid well for authentic mountain craftsmanship. That's how I'd met Celeste 5 years ago. I was installing custom oak shelving in her friend's $1 million cabin. She was visiting for the weekend, recently divorced from some real estate developer in Charlotte. Said she was tired of the corporate world, wanted to experience authentic mountain living. She was beautiful, charming, and seemed genuinely interested in my work. Asked thoughtful questions about wood grains and joinery techniques, even helped me sand a few boards. "There's something so honest about creating things with your hands," she'd said, watching me work. "It's so much more meaningful than pushing papers around an office." I'd fallen for it completely. Here was a woman who appreciated craftsmanship, who understood the value of working with your hands. We dated for 6 months before she moved in with me. Said she wanted to embrace the simpler mountain lifestyle, maybe start a small business selling handmade crafts. But as I stood in Dad's workshop holding that devastating text, I realized I'd misread the grain completely. The irony wasn't lost on me that Celeste had stolen our money while I was restoring the same workbench where Dad had taught me to spot flawed wood. Our relationship had started like a perfect piece of cherry lumber. Beautiful grain, No visible defects, seemingly solid throughout. We'd married after 2 years of dating, had a small ceremony at a mountain resort outside Asheville. Her friends from Charlotte came up for the weekend, all successful professional women who seemed charmed by the authentic mountain experience. They took selfies with my truck, posted Instagram stories about rustic romance, and finding love in unexpected places. The first 3 years were good. Celeste had started a small online business selling what she called artisanal mountain crafts, mostly buying wholesale items from craft fairs and marking them up for urban customers who wanted that handmade aesthetic without the handmade prices. It wasn't exactly honest craftsmanship, but it paid well and kept her busy. She'd even helped me with some projects, holding boards while I measured, organizing my tool collection, taking photos of finished pieces for my website. "You're so talented," she'd say, running her fingers along a hand-carved table leg. "People pay thousands for this kind of work in Charlotte." We bought a house together on 3 acres, partly wooded, with a view of the Blue Ridge Mountains. It had a large detached garage that I converted into my main workshop. Celeste decorated the house with a mix of my furniture and expensive rustic chic pieces from boutique stores, items that looked handmade but were mass-produced overseas. We talked about expanding the business, maybe opening a showroom downtown. Celeste had ideas about marketing to the tourist trade, selling authentic Appalachian furniture to visitors from the flatlands. "We could really capitalize on your family heritage," she'd say. "The whole fourth-generation craftsman story would sell itself." But something started shifting around year 4. Maybe it was when her online business began struggling, competing with cheaper alternatives on Amazon. Maybe it was when she started spending more time on social media, following lifestyle influencers who promoted minimalism and curated living spaces. "Do we really need all this furniture?" she'd ask, looking around our house filled with pieces I'd spent months creating. "It's feeling a bit cluttered. Maybe we should consider a more modern aesthetic." She started suggesting we move closer to town, maybe get a condo with mountain views but less maintenance. Started questioning whether my workshop business was scalable or if I was limiting my potential by staying focused on traditional craftsmanship. Looking back, I should have seen the pattern emerging. Like wood rot, the decay had started small and worked its way deeper into the foundation of what we'd built together. Dad always said that wood tells you its problems if you know how to listen. A slight discoloration here, a soft spot there, grain patterns that don't quite align. Small signs that reveal bigger structural issues underneath. The first real warning sign had come about 6 months before Dad died. Celeste started complaining that I spent too much time in the workshop, that my hobby was taking over our relationship. "Other husbands come home and spend time with their wives," she'd say. "You disappear into that garage every night like you're avoiding me." When I tried to explain that woodworking wasn't a hobby but my profession, my passion, my connection to family tradition, she'd roll her eyes. "Garrett, you make good money doing custom work for rich people, but turning your father's old workshop into some kind of shrine, that's not healthy." She started finding excuses to avoid family gatherings. Dad would invite us over for Sunday dinner, and Celeste would suddenly have plans with friends, or a headache, or urgent business calls to return. "Your father is sweet," she'd say. "But those stories about the old days get repetitive, and that workshop smells like sawdust and motor oil." The comments became more frequent and cutting. When Dad showed her a rocking chair he'd spent months carving by hand, she'd nod politely, but later tell me it looked rustic, in a way that made rustic sound like a disease. When he talked about teaching me traditional joinery techniques that his own father had passed down, she'd check her phone and excuse herself to the bathroom. "He's holding you back," she said one night after we'd spent the afternoon helping Dad organize his tool collection. "You could be designing furniture for high-end hotels, maybe licensing your designs to manufacturers. Instead, you're playing around with antique tools and pretending it's the 1950s. Then Dad got sick. A routine checkup revealed heart problems that required surgery. During his recovery, I spent more time at his place, helping with meals, driving him to appointments, working on small projects in his workshop to keep his spirits up. Celeste's patience with the situation wore thin quickly. "I understand he's your father," she said, "but he has insurance. He can afford home care. You're not responsible for entertaining him with carpentry projects." When Dad passed suddenly from a second heart attack, Celeste's reaction had been complicated. She grieved appropriately at the funeral, said all the right things to relatives and friends, but privately, she seemed more focused on practical matters. "What did he leave you?" was literally the first question she asked after we got home from the lawyer's office. When I told her about the workshop, the tools, and the modest inheritance, her eyes lit up in a way that should have alarmed me. "This could be exactly what we need to start fresh," she'd said, already mentally spending money I hadn't received yet. Dad's inheritance wasn't massive by modern standards, but it was substantial enough to matter. $180,000 in savings, the workshop property worth about $220,000, and a collection of vintage woodworking tools that antique dealers would probably value around $50,000. But for me, the real value wasn't monetary. Every tool in that workshop had a story. The hand planes my great-grandfather had brought from Germany in 1923. The mortise chisels Dad had saved up for during my childhood, buying one piece at a time until he had a complete set. The workbench he'd built from heart pine salvaged from a 200-year-old barn, with dovetail joints so tight you couldn't slip a piece of paper between them. "This isn't just about tools," I'd explained to Celeste the day after the will reading. "This is 4 generations of knowledge, of craftsmanship, of family history." Dad always dreamed of turning this into a teaching workshop, maybe offering classes to young people who want to learn traditional skills. The workshop property itself was perfect for that vision. 3 acres on the outskirts of Asheville, with the original 1,800 square foot workshop building plus a smaller storage shed. The location was private enough for serious work, but accessible enough for students to find. Dad had already started preliminary plans for expansion, sketches for additional workbenches, ideas for organizing group classes, even concepts for a small retail space. We could really honor his memory by making his dream happen, I told Celeste, showing her Dad's notebooks filled with course ideas and workshop layouts. Imagine teaching teenagers how to make something beautiful with their hands, giving them skills they can use for life. Celeste had nodded and smiled, but I could see her mind working differently. She started researching property values in the area, casually mentioning that 3 acres so close to Asheville's growing tech corridor could be quite valuable for development. "I'm not saying we should sell," she'd add quickly when she saw my expression. "I'm just saying it's good to know what we're working with financially. We could use that equity for other investments, maybe leverage it to start a bigger business." She began pushing for joint access to all the inheritance accounts, saying married couples should share everything completely. Made it sound romantic, like some deeper level of trust and commitment. "I want to be your full partner in this, Garrett. Not just your wife, but your business partner too." The pressure was subtle but constant. Comments about how the workshop restoration was taking too long, costing too much, keeping me away from more profitable projects. Suggestions that we could hire contractors to speed up the work, then rent out the space to other craftspeople instead of running classes ourselves. "You're thinking too small," she'd say. "With the right marketing, we could turn this into a destination workshop experience, charge premium prices for weekend retreats where executives come learn woodworking as stress relief." But every time she talked about monetizing Dad's vision, something in my gut resisted. This felt too important, too personal to turn into just another business opportunity. The pressure from Celeste intensified after I'd been working on the workshop restoration for about 6 weeks. She'd started timing my evenings there, commenting when I stayed past 9 p.m. "You've been there every night this week, Garrett. When do we get to spend time together as a couple?" When I suggested she join me, maybe help with some of the lighter restoration work, she'd decline with various excuses. Too dusty, too cold, too much like actual work. "I support your project," she'd say, "but I didn't marry you to become a construction worker." The financial manipulation became more sophisticated. She started researching business loans, presenting spreadsheets about how we could leverage the inheritance more efficiently. According to her calculations, We could borrow against the property value, invest in expanding my existing custom furniture business, and generate more income than Dad's teaching workshop ever would. "You're being sentimental instead of strategic," she'd argue when I resisted her proposals. "Your father worked alone his whole life and never made real money. You have the skills to build something bigger, something that could actually secure our future." She found examples online of successful furniture designers who'd scaled their operations, showed me articles about artisans who'd built nationwide brands. "Look at this guy," she'd say, pointing to some entrepreneur who'd turned a small woodworking shop into a multi-million-dollar company. "He started exactly where you are now." The emotional manipulation was subtler but more effective. She'd schedule date nights on evenings when I'd planned to work in the workshop, then act hurt when I suggested rescheduling. "I'm starting to feel like I'm competing with a dead man for my husband's attention," she said one night, tears in her eyes. When I tried to explain that restoring the workshop was my way of processing grief, of honoring Dad's memory, she'd nod sympathetically, but then circle back to practical concerns. "I understand you need time to grieve," she'd say, "but it's been 2 months. At some point, you need to focus on our future instead of living in the past." She started questioning every expense related to the workshop. New electrical wiring was unnecessarily expensive when we could just run extension cords. Professional-grade ventilation was overkill for a hobby space. When I explained that proper dust collection was essential for both health and quality work, she'd sigh and say, "It's your money, I guess." But it wasn't just my money anymore, and she made sure I knew it. "We're married," she'd remind me. "What affects you affects me. If you're spending our future on this workshop project, I should have a say in how much and how fast." The joint account access became a constant topic. "I feel like you're shutting me out of important decisions," she'd say. "How am I supposed to help plan our finances if I don't know what we're working with?" Eventually, I'd given her access to our regular accounts, the ones with our monthly expenses and short-term savings. But something, maybe Dad's voice in the back of my head, had held me back from putting the inheritance money there directly. The thing about working with hand tools is you learn to think 3 moves ahead. When you're cutting dovetail joints, you're not just making the current cut. You're planning how that cut will affect the next one, and how all the pieces will fit together in the end. Maybe it was years of that kind of thinking, or maybe it was Dad's voice in my head saying, "Measure twice, cut once." But something made me cautious about the inheritance money. While I'd given Celeste access to our regular checking and savings accounts, I'd kept the inheritance funds separate. The $180,000 from Dad's savings went into a new account at a different bank entirely, one that required both signatures for access. When Celeste asked about it, I told her it was temporary, just until I figured out the tax implications and proper investment strategy. "You're overthinking it," she'd said. "Just transfer it to our regular account so we can start planning how to use it." But something in her tone, maybe a little too eager, a little too focused on immediate access, made me hesitate. Instead, I'd taken a different approach. I moved $12,400, a significant but not devastating amount, into our joint account, telling Celeste this was just the first installment while I handled the paperwork for the rest. The lawyer recommended transferring the inheritance in smaller amounts for tax purposes, I'd explained, which wasn't entirely untrue. It just wasn't the whole truth. The real inheritance money went into a trust I'd established with an attorney in Asheville, someone Dad had recommended years earlier for business planning. The workshop property was transferred into an LLC, protecting it from potential liability issues but also making it harder for anyone to access without proper documentation. I'd learned these strategies from some of my wealthier clients, successful business owners who understood the importance of asset protection. "Never put all your eggs in one basket," one of them had told me while I was building his custom home office. "And never give anyone access to everything unless you're absolutely certain they'll never misuse it." The vintage tool collection stayed in the workshop, but I'd had it professionally appraised and photographed, with detailed documentation stored in a safety deposit box. If anything happened to the physical tools, I'd have proof of their value and condition. None of this felt like I was planning for betrayal. It felt like responsible financial management. The same way I'd wear safety glasses when using the table saw, Not because I expected an accident, but because protecting yourself against unlikely but catastrophic events is just good sense. I kept working on the workshop restoration, kept coming home covered in sawdust, kept listening to Celeste's suggestions about maximizing our assets and thinking bigger, but I also kept the real money where she couldn't reach it, just in case. Turned out Dad had taught me more about reading people than I'd realized. The text message had come while I was working alone in Dad's workshop, trying to restore his workbench to its original condition. The irony was perfect. There I was, carefully removing decades of paint and stain to reveal the honest wood underneath, when my phone buzzed with a message that stripped away years of marriage to reveal what had been underneath all along. Just withdrew every penny from our account. Kevin showed me what real love looks like. Thanks for being such a generous ex-husband. I set down my sanding block and read it again. Then I checked our joint account balance. 0. The $12,400 was gone, transferred out 3 hours earlier, while I'd been focused on rebuilding something my father had created with love and patience. A second message arrived 5 minutes later. I know you're upset, but this is for the best. We've been growing apart for months and you know it. The workshop obsession was just the final straw. I've met someone who understands what I need. Then a third. His name is Kevin. He's a business consultant who's helping me start fresh. We're going to travel for a while, maybe start an online business together. Don't try to contact me. I sat in Dad's old wooden chair, the one where he used to plan his projects and sketch designs, and thought about timing. Celeste had chosen tonight specifically. She knew I'd be here, alone, emotionally vulnerable while working on something deeply personal. She knew I'd be too far from home to confront her immediately, too absorbed in the restoration work to notice the money transfer until it was done. It was calculated, strategic, the kind of planning you do when you've been thinking about an exit strategy for a while. I walked around the workshop, looking at all the progress I'd made over the past 2 months. New electrical outlets installed, dust collection system upgraded, tool organization system partially completed. Every improvement made with the vision of honoring Dad's dream, of creating something meaningful that would outlast both of us. Old junk, she'd called it in previous arguments. This collection of hand tools that represented 4 generations of craftsmanship. This workshop where my great-grandfather had taught my grandfather, where my grandfather had taught my father, where my father had taught me. Old junk. I picked up my phone and typed a simple response. Understood. Good luck with your new life. Then I set the phone aside and went back to work on the workbench. There was nothing else to do tonight except what I'd come here to do: restore something beautiful that had been neglected, bring it back to its original purpose. Celeste thought she'd taken everything that mattered. She had no idea what was really in that account, or what was protected in ways she'd never imagined. 4 days passed before Celeste called. I was installing new workbenches in the workshop, using traditional mortise and tenon joints the way Dad had taught me when my phone rang. Garrett, we need to talk. Her voice was different, sharper, more businesslike than the apologetic tone I'd expected. Nothing to talk about, I said, not stopping my work. You made your choice. Don't be childish. Look, I know you're hurt, but this is actually better for both of us. Kevin thinks we should handle the divorce professionally, split everything fairly. Kevin, the business consultant who understood what she needed. My lawyer says the money I took from our joint account was completely legal, she continued. We were both on the account, remember? But we need to discuss the rest of your father's inheritance. Kevin's looked at the numbers, and there has to be more than $12,000. A workshop property plus tools plus a lifetime of savings. We're talking serious money here. I almost smiled. Almost. You think there's more money? I know there is, Garrett. Don't play dumb. Kevin specializes in asset discovery for divorces. He knows how to find hidden accounts, and he's very good at what he does. You should definitely have Kevin look into that, I said. Something in my tone must have registered because she went quiet for a moment. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing. Just that if Kevin's as good as you say, he'll find exactly what he's looking for. Garrett, you're scaring me a little. You're being too calm about this. Why would I be upset? You said this is better for both of us. It is, but look, Kevin wants to meet with you next week. He can help mediate this whole thing, make sure everything's handled fairly. I'd be happy to meet with Kevin, I said. Have him call me. The next call came 2 days later. Kevin himself, with a voice that screamed expensive suits and corporate confidence. Garrett, I'm Kevin Morrison. I'm helping Celeste navigate this difficult situation. I think we can resolve everything amicably if we're all honest about the assets involved. I appreciate that, Kevin. I believe in being completely honest. Good. Now, Celeste mentioned you inherited significant assets from your father. Property, tools, savings. She's concerned you might try to hide some of those assets during divorce proceedings. Kevin, I want everything to be completely transparent. Why don't we meet tomorrow? I can show you exactly what my father left me. That sounds perfect. Celeste will feel much better knowing everything's on the table. I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. Kevin Morrison looked exactly like I'd imagined. Expensive suit, manicured nails. The kind of confident smile that probably worked well in corporate boardrooms. He arrived at my house with Celeste and a leather briefcase that screamed serious business. Garrett, good to meet you, he said, extending a hand. Celeste's told me a lot about you. I understand you're quite skilled with woodworking. Among other things, I replied. We sat at my dining table, one I'd built myself from black walnut, and Kevin opened his briefcase with ceremonial precision. Let's cut to the chase. We've done some preliminary research on your father's estate. Property records show the workshop is worth at least $220,000. Add in tools, equipment, and savings, and we're looking at substantial assets. We are indeed. So where is it? Celeste leaned forward, unable to contain herself. The $12,000 in our account couldn't have been everything. I pulled out a folder I'd prepared and set it on the table. You're absolutely right. Here's everything. Kevin opened the folder and started reading. Bank statements, trust documents, LLC paperwork, property deeds. His expression changed as he read, the confident smile fading into confusion, then concern. What is this? Celeste asked, trying to see over his shoulder. Kevin was quiet for a long time, flipping through pages, checking dates, reading fine print. Finally, he looked up. Celeste, we need to talk privately. No, she said firmly. Whatever it is, say it here. We agreed on transparency. Kevin glanced at me, then back at her. The money you took from the joint account, it wasn't your husband's inheritance. What do you mean? I mean the account you emptied was funded by your husband's regular income. The inheritance money never touched any account you had access to. Celeste's face went white. That's impossible. I monitored our accounts for weeks. You monitored what your husband allowed you to see, Kevin said carefully. The real inheritance is here. He tapped the folder. In a trust fund and LLC structure you never had access to. But that's illegal. Hiding assets from your spouse is illegal. Kevin shook his head slowly. Not when the assets were never marital property to begin with. Your husband inherited this money 3 months ago and immediately placed it in protective structures. Completely legal, completely separate from your marriage. I watched Celeste process this information, saw the exact moment it hit her. You set me up, she whispered. No, I said calmly. I protected myself. There's a difference. The money I took was yours to keep. Consider it a divorce settlement. Kevin was reading something else now, his face growing more serious. Mrs. Celeste, there's something else. Your prenuptial agreement includes a clause about asset transfer without consent. We don't have a prenup, Celeste said. Actually, you do, signed 5 years ago. Your husband's copy is notarized and witnessed. He showed her the document. I watched her read it, watched her remember signing it. We'd told her it was just paperwork for the house purchase. She'd signed without reading it. The clause was simple. Any attempt to transfer marital assets without mutual consent would result in forfeiture of all claims to marital property. This can't be legal, she said. It's perfectly legal, and the money transfer you initiated falls squarely under this clause. Celeste looked at me with something I'd never seen before, fear. Garrett, please. We can work this out. I made a mistake. I'll give the money back. I stood up. Keep it, I said. You've earned it. I walked out of that meeting feeling lighter than I had in months. Not vindicated or triumphant, just free. 8 months passed before I heard from Celeste again. I was in the workshop, now fully restored and hosting its first woodworking class for local teenagers, when my phone rang. Garrett? Her voice was different, smaller, scared. What do you want, Celeste? I need help. Kevin's gone. I set down the chisel I'd been demonstrating. Gone where? Just gone. Disappeared, with everything. She was crying now. Real tears instead of the manipulative kind I'd grown used to. The $12,000 from our account, plus my savings, plus money I borrowed from my sister to invest in his business consulting company. How much total? $43,000. Everything I had. I sat down on Dad's old wooden stool, the one where he used to rest between projects. And you're calling me because I don't know what else to do. My sister won't speak to me. I can't make the payments on the loan. Kevin's business was fake, Garrett. The whole thing was a scam. I'm sorry that happened to you. Are you, really? Or are you enjoying this? I thought about it honestly. I'm not enjoying your pain, Celeste, but I'm not surprised by it either. What's that supposed to mean? It means you fell for the same thing twice. Someone charming who told you what you wanted to hear. Someone who seemed to understand you better than your actual partner. You just couldn't see that Kevin was running the same play on you that you'd run on me. The silence stretched long enough that I thought she'd hung up. I know I hurt you, she said finally. I know I made terrible mistakes. But could you loan me enough to pay my sister back? I'll lose everything if I can't. No. Please, Garrett. I know I don't deserve it, but you already took everything you're going to get from me, I said. Kevin took the rest. That's justice working exactly the way it's supposed to. So that's it? You're just going to let me lose everything? You already lost everything that mattered, Celeste. The rest is just details. I hung up and looked around the workshop. 15 teenagers were learning to make simple cutting boards. Their faces focused and serious as they worked with hand planes and chisels. This was what Dad had dreamed of, passing on knowledge, teaching young people to create something beautiful with their hands. One of the students, a girl named Maya who reminded me of myself at that age, held up her first successful planing shaving, a perfect curl of cherry wood so thin you could read through it. Mr. Garrett, I did it! Look! I walked over to examine her work. Perfect. Your great-grandfather would be proud of that craftsmanship. That's what real wealth looked like. Not money in an account, but knowledge passed down, skills preserved. Young people learning that they could create something lasting with patience and care. 2 years have passed since that last conversation with Celeste. I heard through mutual friends that she moved back to Charlotte, filed for bankruptcy, and now works at a furniture store. Ironic, given her opinions about my old junk. Kevin was never found, probably running the same romance scam in another city with another lonely woman looking for someone who understands her. The workshop has become everything Dad dreamed it would be. We run classes 3 nights a week and weekend workshops for adults. The waiting list stays full. Parents wanting their kids to learn real skills. Retirees looking for meaningful hobbies. Young professionals seeking an antidote to their digital lives. I've taught over 200 students how to use hand tools, how to read wood grain, how to create furniture that will last generations. Each one learns the same lesson Dad taught me. Good craftsmanship requires patience, planning, and respect for your materials. The inheritance money has grown steadily through careful investments, the kind of long-term thinking Dad would have approved of. But more importantly, I've been able to expand the workshop program, offer scholarships to kids who can't afford classes, and even start a partnership with the local high school's vocational program. I've been dating someone new. Sarah, a high school art teacher who signed up for a weekend